how to pick your tech path in the UK. My name is Isaac, previous CTO of a funded startup, and I run the checkout team at Pretty Little Thing. Now, there's actually a lot of resource and help to get you into tech, but I feel like none of it is really pointed at the UK, and as such, this video is more for you guys. It's very overwhelming when first getting into it because there's so many different options and paths. So this video, I'm going to be covering 3 main roles, which are predominant in the UK, they're quite accessible, and how you actually go about getting in them, on what kind of expectations you can have. I'm going to be explaining 2 different points in the career, so starting and 5 years into the role. This is to help people have a little bit better idea of a timeline in their head and map out their career if it's something they're thinking about getting into. Beyond 5 years, the way you actually progress generally is actually by going to bigger companies which have larger teams and responsibilities, such as the FANGs. If you wanted to get into more of the tech side, you work with the Googles, the Facebooks. Or the other alternatives, you kind of pivot a little bit more into the soft skill side and pick up more like a business managerial role. So that's kind of what it looks like after the 5 years. Or you could do something like contracting. The 3 roles I'm going to be going over are front-end development, back-end development, and DevOps. I will explain them a little bit more in detail afterwards. The reason I'm going over these roles is because they fit into web service architecture, which is quite a defined system at the moment. As such, when going for the roles, you can expect, even if the languages differ slightly, the approaches are very much the same. So being able to pick one will almost guarantee you the job, because I'm defining it by jobs, not necessarily skill sets. That's quite important. Okay, so what are these roles? Front end is everything that you can see when you're on a website. If you've logged into Twitter, all the information that you can see on your page you can interact with, that is the front end. The back end is the service, like the business logic. So you think audience, customer, business logic, back end. That is when you try to log in, the front end will send a request to the back end, and the back end will send you back information. And DevOps, which kind of originally wasn't a role, it was more an approach to how you'd handle backend, but because it's become so popular and you've got frameworks like Azure and AWS, it's kind of become its own role now. But it's to do with how architecturally you structured the backend. So I'm going to be talking about all these roles as starting from a junior, which is the lowest level of experience. I'm going to start with front end. Front end is probably the easiest to get into. Was originally one of the more simple ones because you kind of just needed HTML and CSS. If you think of some of the very early websites that were very slow to render, which is like a blank page with text on it, that originally was front end. In recent years, this has actually become very complicated due to UX, which is basically optimizing the flow and interaction that customers have to improve whatever the business goal is, and also optimization in terms of time. If a website takes longer than a second to load, a lot of traffic is actually going to drop off. So in similar ways that marketing back in the day, you used to be able to just bang a banner on a website and people would click on it. As people get more tech literate and use the internet more, we kind of filter through these things. So it's actually more important to be visually appealing to people. This role isn't necessarily highly dependent on design ability, though you do need a degree of design eye. You don't have to actually design the pages, but you do need to be able to see the design and recreate it to a decent degree. Code cleanliness is important, but predominantly the main thing is just to make something that looks good and runs very smoothly and cleanly. Starting with 0 experience, it will probably take you 6 to 12 months to secure a front end role, and the salary you're looking 30 to 35k in London. Up north, probably a little bit lower, maybe 25 to 30. This role is very much dependent on learning specific frameworks. So some of the other roles are a little bit more ambiguous, but basically because every browser uses HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, you're kind of pigeonholed by what you can use. So all the frameworks are basically JavaScript based, and the main ones you're looking at are React and Angular. Doesn't really matter which framework you pick because they're the dominant ones. Either one of those really is enough to get your foot in the door. Front-end development at the moment very much is dominated by frameworks as opposed to languages. So it's not like, oh, you need to learn JavaScript, which you do. You need to learn React or Angular, more or less. It's one of those. There is also a lot of memory management because, as I said, optimization is super important on the front end and caching, so you use stuff like Redux. I have made a video about how to get into front end, which the link will be somewhere, so that's probably the best thing to look at. 5 years in, say senior level, you can be making 50 to 80k realistically. Caveat, sometimes the more reputable companies will actually pay slightly less because they don't have to compete with talent because they've got such a good name. That's fine. If you can get a good name company on your CV, it really will pay dividends in the future, and I'd highly recommend doing it even if it's a slight pay cut. After 5 years, you could also go into contracting. Contracting at this level looks about 300 to 600, which 300 a day is 6k a month, so really not bad. Okay, then we have backend. This is a little bit trickier to get into than the front end because front end making a portfolio, it's actually quite simple in terms of being able to visually show someone what you've done. Backend, because it's kind of not visual, it's more difficult to show. Although you can have code portfolios, you can use things like GitHub, a little bit harder. It's also a little bit harder to get jobs as well. So whereas front end roles will actively hire for junior, backend, because you deal with business logic, it's less likely someone's gonna hire a junior. It's more midway midweight roles minimum. Also, because of the kind of business logic they're doing, it might be customer information or like, let's say, payment gateways, pricing. You kind of don't really want a junior messing with some of these things, so sometimes it is a little bit harder to get your foot in the door. So this is quite framework heavy, but because you can use different languages, frameworks it's a bit harder to pick. So Java will have its own thing, Node has its own thing. You can also use Python as well, which is great for like data if you wanted to cross skill. You probably also need to learn a little bit of development architectures as well. So the whole serverless Lambda thing that's really popular at the moment, I will probably make a video on that at some point, but yeah, cool. So I'm gonna be ignoring junior roles because when I looked, I didn't actually really find any. It's more midweight roles. You're looking 35 to 45k. In theory, I'd say 16 to 18 months. The reason it's a little bit longer than Frontend, as I said, is potentially building up a portfolio is a little trickier. It's just a little less clean cut, but that being said, I actually don't advise juniors put junior on their CV anyway. Just drop it and let people judge you by experience. I do know people that have gone through courses and kind of snagged a lower mid-rate role from the jump, so it is possible. All you need to do is work at a single company and you got your foot in the door, you know what I mean? You have a year at one place, I promise you, you'll be able to move to another. It will be much easier to actually get the role and you will get paid more. 5 years in as a senior, you can be in 60 to 90. If you do want to move into a higher managerial role or architecture, it's actually easier having this on your CV than being a front-end dev. So from backend, it's kind of in between front-end and DevOps. You have a very good overview of the system and the architecture. It's less of a leap than having to do front-end and then being something like a system architect. You are actually closer to the business logic being on the backend as well, so maybe sometimes a managerial role as well might be easy to get. However, you are a little bit further from the audience and customers, so everything to weigh up. Back-end contractors get paid 400 to 750. I'm currently on 650 as a full stack, so that works out really well afterwards if you don't want to go to managerial but you want to upskill after being a senior. And finally, DevOps and infrastructure. This one is a little bit harder to get because there are sort of prerequisite skills, and then the cherry on the cake is kind of, you need to know a hosting service provider. This is kind of an interesting field of work that's come around in recent years, and it's quite lucrative. Remember when I was talking about like Web 1 and front-end websites were very simple? Back then, if a company had their own tech infrastructure, you would basically have to physically have your own servers, which were just computers in the office or whatever. Amazon Web Services came along and kind of changed the game. Now people will actually outsource the physical servers that they utilize. Most coders these days, when they make a website or a server or anything like that, we actually upload it somewhere and then it's hosted by a provider. As such, most people doing DevOps won't be physically actually managing servers. They will be working with a framework such as Azure, Google Cloud, or AWS, Amazon Web Services, to organize and structure people's architecture. This requires prior experience with networking. You also need a little bit of backend code, and you need a healthy understanding of security within networks. So it's probably the longest to get into, but the flip side is you can get accredited with it, and that actually helps you a lot more than front end or back end. So if you are accredited with AWS, they actually have their own training services. It looks better than if you just went to a code academy and it's like, oh, I do front end. You don't need crazy code experience, you just kind of need functional enough code experience, and then it is really more down to do with like networking, security, and how to use the service provider you're using, such as Amazon. When you are using these framework tools, they're built in a way whereby you can actually use it such as a website, whereas when coders work, it's that all weird matrixy stuff. You could probably get this in 12 months. Again, it's like backend, it's trickier to find junior roles. You're better off just pushing yourself as a mid and being savvy with how you present yourself. But you're looking like 45 to 60k, which is more or less the highest. It's well paid. There are definitely less roles though. When I was working a pretty low thing, each team there'd be maybe 4 or 5 devs, which would be like a 50-50 split on front and back end. Then you'd have one DevOps person that would handle 2-3 teams. That's kind of the distribution of work. There's definitely less of them required. When you're a smaller company, you normally don't have the kind of bottlenecks that are caused by poor architecture, such as not being able to serve all your customers, or because you're not at such a large point, the cost efficiency of properly managing your resources isn't really worth hiring someone. So not only are there less required per company, but there are less companies that actually have the availability. After 5 years, seniors gonna be getting 80 to the 100k mark, and then contractors, you're looking 850, which is probably the highest contractor rate I've seen. Okay, so overview. There is no real best. It just kind of depends on what you want based on your timeline and expectations. The only goal really was just to give you a better idea of what to expect from starting to 5 years in. The easiest one to get is front end, and there is quite a lot of support out there. If you don't like your current place and you want to transition to tech, I would suggest doing that to just get your foot in the door, and it's much easier to cross skill once you're already in. So for example, if you wanted to learn backend and you started as a front-end engineer, it would not take nearly as long to get into backend, and you'd have a safe environment to practice. All of them do expand into the other, I would say on a spectrum, it starts front end to DevOps with backend in the middle, from being like audience and then more like technical side. It's kind of hard to go from front end to DevOps and vice versa. It can be done, but realistically, it's normally through the conduit of backend. Generally, a front end developer wouldn't need to know DevOps and vice versa, unless you wanted to make your own thing and therefore wanted to have a whole through pipeline. I have made a video of how to get into front end, and I'm probably going to make one for how to get into backend at some point. There will be links somewhere if I have. So how do you go about learning these roles? It does depend. You can be self-taught. You can also go through courses. I probably would recommend courses as a guided route, as there's so much information out there. Honestly, it kind of can be mind-boggling and very difficult to stay on one specified path. I would recommend courses, but each to their own. The nice thing about courses as well, especially if they build you up to getting jobs, is there's only certain things interviewers can kind of ask of you. They have a limited amount of time to assess you, and understanding what kind of lens they view you through and building your career and your learning path towards that, it can be easier to get into jobs. So courses that are decent will actually say that they try and get you jobs afterwards. They have a recruitment wing, and the whole point is when they train you, it's not necessarily to know everything about the role. It is to be able to get your foot through the door, which will teach you the most anyway. All you want to do is just get that first role. I also want to be very clear. I think anyone can get into tech should they take the time. You don't need to be crazy smart. You don't need to know all the maths, and you don't even need to go into offices these days. It's just understanding processes and systems, and coding is just a way of using computer languages to do that. That will come easier to some than others, but you know what? There's so many non-technical roles in tech companies anyway. Like, they are just companies, they are just roles. Whew. Okay, so that was just my experience, but I do hope it was useful. If you know someone who's currently trying to make the transition into tech and they're not sure what to do, please send them this video so they can make a more informed decision. Thanks, guys.